This video is not intended to encourage or glorify any kind of drug use. The sole purpose of these videos is to educate you on the dangers of what these substances can do to you. Please do not do any of the acts mentioned in this video. I repeat, do not do any of the acts mentioned in this video.
Welcome to the world of Tales from the Trip.
I live in a third world country where drug laws are strict, so finding LSD, shrooms, or any other drug is near impossible. My friends and I used to smoke weed that we harvested from the wild, but the weed was getting boring. We were young and dumb, so when I heard some kids talking about huffing butane to get high, we became interested. We bought butane from a store. It was pretty cheap. Then my friend pulled out a big plastic bag and started pushing the tips of the butane in front of it, releasing gas into the bag. There was liquid butane at the bottom of it that didn't vaporize, which means we all took big hits. On the first hit, my body felt warm and comforting. When I exhaled the butane, my voice was very low, as were my friends. I started to feel a vibrating sensation in my head, like a frequency. There was a letter that kept vibrating in my head repeatedly. I could only feel, hear, and see that specific letter. Trip number 1. Butane highs are short, so I grabbed the bag and took a long, nice huff. That was a mistake. I suddenly teleported to a fantasy world or another dimension, I don't know. There was a wizard that kind of looked like the Ice King from Adventure Time, but he was static. What I mean is, he was just a statue that floated around and shouted something like King's Order to me. I got teleported to a green field where there was a small table and humanoid children-like figures sitting around it. They had no faces, but were talking to each other. Then the Ice King-like wizard shouted again, and I turned into their dinner on the table. Oh my god, that was my first hallucination. It was scary, but I didn't know that it was nothing compared to the next trips. After a day, I bought butane and left home alone. I was excited to trip alone, sitting in the bathroom, filling the bag with butane, and taking long huffs. Trip number 2. During this trip, a strange geometric entity flew through the bathroom door. It was in a sitting position but flying, with the head shaped like a pyramid on top of a cube and a rectangular body, amongst other shapes. Terrified by this entity, I cast some sort of spell, and then rod-like things grew out the wall, penetrating the bathroom. Some of them even penetrated through me, and they kept growing, filling the room more and more. The pain became unbearable, and I thought to myself, this is how I'm going to die, as I closed my eyes. The entity then hijacked my brain and entered my head saying, I don't like your thoughts. Die, 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 die. It started poking holes in my mind, which was irresistible, and my thoughts slowly chipped away until everything turned completely black. Trip number 3. On another day, alone in the bathroom with the bag, I huffed a few big hits, and a euphoric feeling kicked in. The room started getting hot, and I left the butane on the floor. When I looked at it, it was bursting into fire. Panicked, I tried to get it out of the room, but the door was locked, and in my intoxicated state, I couldn't open it. The room temperature kept rising, causing everything around me to melt. The washing machine, shower curtains, and even the toilet. Looking at my legs, I saw that my slippers had melted, and I felt the heat in my melting flesh. My legs turned into skeletons from the heat, unable to hold my body weight, and I collapsed onto the floor, hitting my head on the sink before waking up. Trip number 4. The other day, I thought that changing my environment would lead me to a good trip, but it didn't. It started with huffing a little and feeling the effects, but not tripping. Then I took a big hit and started seeing my friends, girlfriend, and parents all around me, looking at me disappointed. It was weird, like it was reality, but I felt slight discomfort around my eyes. When I touched my eyes, I felt little devil creatures covering them, making me see things. I ripped them off, thinking it would end, but when I looked at the floor, I saw a stick figure with a face like a really old man morphing out of it. It started screaming and lunging at me. I was running like a kid, screaming at the top of my lungs, trying to escape the stick figure. It was hitting me as I ran. I fell on the floor, curled up, and started crying. When the hallucinations ended, my home looked like total chaos, and my body was sore everywhere. From that day on, I never touched butane again. I developed PTSD from all the bad trips, always afraid of something and getting scared easily. After every session of butane, I experienced throwing up, dizziness, headache, depression, appetite loss, and inability to think straight for about 20 to 30 minutes. After a few years, I started researching inhalants and realized that I had destroyed a chunk of my brain cells and lost a few IQ points. One of my friends died. Doctors said his organs were frozen due to huffing so much butane. I was very lucky. Please don't do inhalants. Just smoke weed or get drunk. It is not worth it. It was only my second time huffing butane. The first time I tried it, it didn't do anything to me. I was driving and huffing at the same time. The butane made me pass out, and when I woke up, I was in a car wreck. I was on the wrong side of the road. My car and the other car were completely totaled, and there were ambulances and police cars everywhere. When I first came to, I had no idea where I was or what was going on, and I was in so much pain I couldn't move. It all felt like a really, really bad dream, and I wish it was. The paramedics put a neck brace on me, put an oxygen tube in my nose, put me on a stretcher, and took me to the hospital. I had to get 8 stitches in the back of my head because when I crashed, the speaker in the back of my car flew forward and cut my head all the way to the skull. My collarbone and part of my chest were burned and bruised from my seatbelt, but I'm glad I was wearing it. I wasn't hurt very seriously, but I was lucky. I found out that the other car was being driven by a 17-year-old girl and her little brother had been in the passenger seat. They didn't die, but they were hurt worse than I was. I felt so bad and so stupid. I never meant to hurt anybody. I had watched friends of mine buy the aerosol cans of butane for the refillable butane lighters and inhale them. This is done by putting a piece of cloth, the sleeve of your t-shirt works good, over the little dispenser nozzle. You then bite down on the nozzle with your front teeth, push down, close your mouth around it, and inhale. Well, they seemed to be having fun, so I tried it. The first few 10-second long inhalations did nothing. However, after perfecting my inhaling technique and doing several hits one right after another, stopping only to exhale, I began to hear a strange "whoa, whoa" song repeating over and over. Then, after several more hits, I got this very weak feeling, and everything got lighter in color. My vision began to flash from normal to just seeing black. I got a very disconnected feeling. I just sat back with the lights and felt very messed up. The flashing lights only lasted about 2 minutes. The disconnected feeling lasted about 5 minutes. A few tips for those who are going to try this, or have but only a few times. You will reach the peak of a high. Don't inhale anymore. Just let the high die before doing any more hits. Hitting during a high won't do much, besides being wasteful. However fun this might sound, please be careful. Don't do more than 10 ounces of this stuff during one day. Also, the side effects are you'll become very tired after several highs. You will get a very strong headache that lasts about 12 hours. And worst of all, your lungs will kill the next day. I had a horrible cough for about 4 days after doing the butane once, and my friend had to go to the doctor because of damage he had done to his lungs. So if you try butane, don't do it very much. It's better to go buy some nitrous. Please don't do butane, or any kind of inhalant for that matter, please. Thank you. I started experimenting with butane when I was a kid living at home. It was the only thing I could get my hands on, which is how I imagine most people find it. At first, I was spraying it into a deflated bag and huffing the pure butane out of it. I later perfected my delivery method, and that's when I was able to achieve strong hallucinations. I would spray it into a poster bag, about 2 feet long and only 2 or 3 inches wide. The butane would initially be a liquid, but would rapidly freeze into an ice chunk at the bottom due to decompression. I would pinch up the one open end, and as the ice began to evaporate into new cooled butane gas, I could hold the open end against my nose. I didn't like how it tasted. I would inhale until the bag deflated and pinch it again, allowing more of the ice to evaporate before my next hit. I could usually take between 10 and 12 hits before refilling the bag. I would usually end up using 3 cans before finally stopping. My first hallucination was completely auditory. I was pinching the bag and waiting while staring down at the ground. I was so introspective about the particular kind of high that I was experiencing, I didn't notice the bag becoming increasingly pressurized. I noticed right as it burst, and I watched the bag pop, then fall limply, and about 2 or 3 seconds later, finally heard it, then again and again. About once a second continuously each time, just as loud as the first. It then turned into a hum, and eventually a ringing that seemed to come and go. The next hallucination is the last time that I ever touched butane. I was in my room huffing, and I got some extremely strange feeling of foreboding, something I can now relate to that moment you realize it's about to be a bad LSD trip. My sister walked into my room and greeted me and introduced herself, already freaking weird. Then she said she had been practicing a dance move and began to show me, but she said she felt dizzy and started laughing. Then as she was laughing, her eye popped out of her head and rolled under the bed I was on. I remember not even considering that this was a trip. It felt so incredibly real. She ran away crying, and I heard a voice that sounded like my mom telling me to find the eye. I started looking under the bed, taking everything out from underneath it, and just as I was about to give up, I found it. I picked it up and began walking to my sister's room. As I opened the door, it's like I woke up from the trip because all of a sudden, I realized none of that had happened. I opened my hand and there was no eye, and my sister wasn't home. She was at school. She came home later with my mom and had both of her eyes exactly where they were supposed to be. I can't explain it, but even with some heavy LSD doses taken between now and then, that's the most realistic hallucination I have ever had. So there's my story. The absolute power that gas had to make something so real to me at the time scared me and intrigued me. I'll never touch it again, but I'm very curious to know what you other misfits who've huffed butane have hallucinated. After doing some pretty deep internet searching, I was only able to find 1 or 2 stories about it, so here I am.